Welcome to this special episode of CP Newswatch. I'm Steve Lambert in the Winnipeg office of the Canadian Press. On Wednesday, we're scheduled to hear victim impact statements and sentencing in the trial of Jeremy Skibicki, a 37-year-old man convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder in a case that has shocked people across the country. Skibicki was accused of killing 4 Indigenous women in 2022, and the trial heard he committed vile acts on the women's bodies and disposed of them in garbage bins near his apartment. Skibicki has admitted to the killings, but his lawyers argued unsuccessfully that he should be found not criminally responsible due to mental illness. The judge rejected that idea. This is a case that has included a lot of surveillance video, physical evidence from Skibicki's apartment, and words from Skibicki himself in a lengthy police interview. It has also shown another spotlight on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm joined now by Brittany Hobson, who has covered the trial from the beginning. Brittany, can you tell us about how this case came to light?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so if we go back to about spring of 2022, there was a gentleman who was dumpster diving in bins near Skibicki's apartment, and he came across the dismembered head of one of Skibicki's victims, Rebecca Contois. Now, this man preserved this evidence. He had called police, and he wanted to make sure that before garbage collection had come, that he would be able to preserve this evidence. So he was able to take out Rebecca Contois' remains and hold them while police went there to investigate. Shortly after, police did find out that Jeremy Skibicki, who had lived in a nearby apartment, had added Rebecca Contois to his lease, or attempted to add her to his apartment lease. And that is when he became a suspect, and he was brought in shortly after her remains were found. More of her partial remains were found in other garbage bins in the area, and eventually the following month, additional remains were found at the Brady at the Brady landfill.
And the police questioning went on for many hours. So what did Skibicki say about the killings and why he committed them?
Yes, police had held Jeremy Skibicki for about 24 hours and questioned him for a significant portion of that. Much was played during the trial, as well as a pre-trial, to get an idea, I guess, of how police came to find out about also the other victims. During this interrogation, police had, asked Mr. Skibicki about Rebecca Contois, how he knew her. He was very calm during this entire interrogation, answered clearly, and eventually it got to a point, I think it was several hours in, that Skibicki eventually admitted to killing Rebecca Contois, and then, to police's surprise, he also admitted to killing 3 others. And this was all played during the trial. And so at the time, he didn't know the name of 2 of the victims, but he did know the name of one of them, who was Morgan Harris. Later came to find out that one victim was Mercedes Myron, and another is still an unknown, unidentified woman. And during this time, he then proceeded to lay out exactly what he had done to them, where he had found them, how he killed them, and then what he did with their bodies afterwards.
And you told us a little bit about the 4 women Skibicki has admitted to killing, and the trial heard that he targeted vulnerable Indigenous women. It sounded quite methodical.
Yes. So the 4 victims are Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, and an unidentified woman that Indigenous grassroots members have named Buffalo Woman, because we still do not know her identity. So these were all 4 Indigenous women that lived in Winnipeg. They were vulnerable women that attended many of the homeless shelters that are in the city's downtown core, near the downtown core. They they're all mothers. Well, the three identified women are mothers, and Morgan Harris is even a grandmother. They were all loved by their family and loved by the community. Some struggled with mental health issues, some struggled with addictions, but they still all kept in contact with their family while they were, being living on the streets or living in a street entrenched life. So their deaths were quite a shock to the families and the community members, but they were all loved and they struggled, but I, that is, at least that's the Crown had argued that this is why Skibicki had targeted them, thinking that they would likely not be missed when that certainly was not the case.
And if I recall, there was surveillance footage as well of Skibicki sort of scoping out people and approaching one of the victims at a homeless shelter.
Yes, so one
Yeah.
of the homeless shelters, it's an Indigenous led homeless shelter that Morgan Harris frequented. There was surveillance video that was presented during the trial of Skibicki sitting with Morgan Harris, as well as attending the homeless shelter. He had a home, but he often would go there for food and whatnot. And then there was video surveillance of Skibicki with Rebecca Contois on a bus, as well as some video surveillance with Mercedes Myron.
And it's a bit of an unusual case, well, in many respects, but one that stands out for me is the fact that a Buffalo woman, we don't have a confirmed identity. Not only have the remains not been found, but we don't have a confirmed identity. What do we know about Buffalo women?
So basically, the police were going off of what Skibicki described Buffalo Woman as. So he said that, she was his first victim. In, I believe it was March of 2022, he had met her outside a homeless shelter, described her as Indigenous, probably in her mid-20s, maybe a petite figure. She was wearing a baby fat branded jacket. It was a reversible bomber style jacket. Police were able to eventually locate that jacket. Skibicki had sold it on Facebook Marketplace, but they were able to locate that jacket and take some DNA off of it, which they say belongs to Buffalo Woman. So they have been getting DNA samples, and families have come forward with families who have missing family members in the city have come forward to submit their own DNA in hopes that maybe it could give them some answers. Even as far as I would say earlier, we heard during the trial earlier this year, police were still collecting DNA samples, trying to match the sample that they found on the jacket, but still no luck. So there is still a family, there's still community that, are looking for their daughter and want answers. So it's the police, as far as we know, are still pursuing all avenues.
And Skibicki's lawyers argued he should be found not criminally responsible due to a mental illness. The Crown disagreed, and the judge in the end sided with the Crown. Each side had experts testify. Can you tell us more about that argument?
Yeah, so kind of right before the trial started, Skibicki's lawyers had announced that they were going to try to go for a not criminally responsible decision, claiming that Skibicki was schizophrenic. The Crown obviously disagreed with that and brought in their own expert to testify to otherwise. So Skibicki, we had heard during the trial, had a lengthy medical record. Much of his medical records were brought in. He had gone to many hospitals, had issues when he was a youth, a teenager, but was never officially diagnosed as schizophrenic and never was prescribed medication for schizophrenia. The Crown tried to argue that they brought their own expert in to try to argue that Skibicki was driven by perverse sexual desires, and that's what led to these killings. That they looked at his history, his former partner testified to some of the violence that she faced at his hands, including sexual assaults and some of the perverse sexual interests that he tried to bring into their relationship. And so the Crown really leaned on the fact that Skibicki was not schizophrenic. They tried to squash that, and that he was just driven by his perverse sexual interests.
And the killings led to calls to search the Prairie Green landfill, where the remains of two of the victims are believed to be. And that ended up being a political issue in last year's election. The NDP government has promised that a search will go ahead and has been laying the groundwork. Where is that at now?
So shortly after the trial wrapped up, before the judge gave his verdict, the current NDP provincial government had announced that they were actually in the background moving forward with some of the things that needed to get done before this search took place. So they started building a healing lodge. They started consulting experts. They started making their own plan about how they would go ahead with a search at the Prairie Green landfill. So the physical search for the women's remains, which are Morgan Harris and Mercedes Meyer, and they're the two women that are believed to be at the landfill, has not started yet. The government says it's expected to start in the fall this time. They were in the process of moving the healing lodge, healing center to the ground, setting up hydro, plumbing, all of those kind of things, as well as doing, a sample search. So taking an area separate from where the women's remains are believed to be, and doing a test search to see, what kind of things they would find, how intact, where was a refuse, those kinds of things. So it is expected that a search of the Prairie Green landfill is to start sometime this fall.
Okay, and what is next with the case? We're getting sentencing, and we're going to hear from the families this week.
Yeah, so Skibicki has been found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. Normally, sentencing hearings don't always happen in these types of cases because it is an automatic life sentence. But the judge, or at least the Crown, said that the judge felt it was an important case and an important moment, and felt that the families needed their moment to address Skibicki. These families had been sitting in this weeks-long trial, even prior to that pre-trial. All these families were there. They showed up every day, had to sit through hearing the worst things that happened to their relatives and their family members. And now this is the time that they really get to face this killer and to let him know how it has impacted them. So we'll be hearing from each of the families on Wednesday, as well as a community victim impact statement. So Indigenous grassroots groups have gone to different cities in Manitoba over the past few weeks and started collecting information to hear about how this has impacted the community as a whole.
Well, thanks very much, Brittany, for delving into what has already been a lengthy and complex story. Brittany's coverage continues this week.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. For more of today's top stories, visit thecanadianpressnews.ca.